Dogs are man's best friend. There's no doubt about it. Time and time again, it has been shown that dogs will stick with humans and help at any moment they can. Without dogs, humans might not even be around today. And humans know how talented and loyal dogs are, and have entrusted them with some of the biggest and most important missions there are. And one of the biggest achievements dogs have ever achieved is when one wolf pack traveled a long journey through the harsh environments in order to save the lives of a town of children. This is the story of Balto and Togo, the most brave dogs that have ever lived. Our story begins almost exactly 100 years ago, in the year 1925, deep in December. The winter of 1925 was unlike the world had ever seen before. When December came around, the world was met with snowstorms, multiple feet of snow, and below freezing temperatures. And none were hit as hard as Alaska, which was the home for a small town called Nome, lying approximately 2 degrees south of the Arctic Circle, and despite the harsh weathers, it was a fairly populated town. A lot of that is due to the recent gold rush in the area, and people flocking to the town. But even after the gold rush ended, the town still had a bit over 1,000 residents, making it the biggest town in northern Alaska. Although that's not saying much. This town was incredibly secluded from the rest of the world, and the few ways out were incredibly dangerous. It was quite literally impossible for a person to single-handedly brave the trail. The only way to travel it was dog sleds, but even then, dog sleds were very rarely used, really only in emergencies. For stuff like mail or other non-essential supplies, it would be airlifted by a small helicopter. This town was very vulnerable to many things. They only had one doctor in the whole town. In the harsh winters, they were at a major disadvantage, and if harm struck their town, they could do nothing to stop it. And in December 1925, those fears came true. Due to the small population of the town, they had only one doctor as permanent resident, a man named Dr. Curtis Welch. He and his nurses aided to the town during the winter months, and one day, like any other, he was managing the hospital's inventory, and discovered that their entire batch of diphtheria antitoxin had either been used up or had expired. This was a very important serum, and he quickly placed an order for more, expecting a fast delivery. And while at the moment he thought nothing of it, it would take a turn for the worst very soon after, when a snowstorm hit, and the temperatures continued to drop. It got so cold that the harbor froze entirely, then getting buried so deep in snow that what was a hub to connect Alaskan towns is now unrecognizable from the other snowy plains surrounding it. And the doctor received news that because of this, no packages, including the medicine, could be delivered. They would have to wait until the late spring to get the medicine. There were multiple other attempts to deliver the serum, such as a helicopter, but the weather was so harsh that the blades and gears had completely frozen, now as hard as stone, unable to fly, meaning they would have to survive the winter without any medicine. Now, the town of Nome was trapped in an icy coffin, secluded deep in the mountains. And if an epidemic began, they would be near helpless to stop it, which is exactly what befell them. Early December saw Dr. Welch get an influx of children with sore throats, which he diagnosed as tonsillitis, completely dismissing the idea of it being diphtheria. But as the days went by, the town saw people getting sick left and right, and he had to admit this was indeed diphtheria, when he diagnosed it in a boy who died just 2 weeks later. The day after that, a 7-year-old girl came to him and showed the same symptoms. He had already lost someone to this disease just the day before. He wouldn't let it happen again, but they were out of the vaccine serum, so he had to resort to using some long-expired serum, hoping it would still work. It did not. She passed away by the morning. When the news reached Dr. Welch, that's when he realized this wasn't just a common cold spreading. This was an epidemic. A deadly epidemic. When the night came, the town higher-ups had an emergency meeting. They began quarantine, but that wasn't enough. 20 more people got the virus, and 50 more were at severe risk. And as the cases continued, and Welch gathered more information, he realized that if they didn't get that antitoxin, their town would soon have a 100% mortality rate. So with no other option, he used the radio line only for emergencies to send out a message. An epidemic of diphtheria is almost inevitable here. Stop. I am in urgent need of 1 million units of diphtheria antitoxin. Stop. Mail is only form of transportation. Stop. I have made the application to Commissioner of Health of the territories for antitoxin already. Stop. There are about 3,000 white natives in the district. Stop. Now the outside world was alerted, and they had toxin to deliver and set up at the Nulato railway station. But now comes the most difficult part: how to deliver it. They had another emergency meeting on their options, because they didn't just need to find a way to transport it. That thing would need to be fast. Because of how the serum is made, it would become unusable after 6 days of such cold temperatures. They would need the fastest mode of transportation possible. Some proposed a plane, but like I mentioned before, all the gears were frozen, and there weren't any train tracks anywhere near them. The idea of technology was practically out of the question. So that left one option left. One sitting under their noses. The very things they've been using to quickly transport other packages. The mail dogs. They were now their only option. So it was decided they would use dog sleds. And they found a man willing to go that was one of the best dog sledders in Alaska at the time, Leonard Seppala. But this wasn't just another trip. This would be the hardest journey this town would ever take. Despite the incredible danger, the town of Nome continued assembling a sled team of the best dogs around, most notably including dogs named Togo and Balto. And like that, they were off. Off on a trail that is 938 miles long. Climbing across the highest mountains, trudging through the feet of snow, running across the frozen lakes, any mistake meaning certain death. Ending at the port of Nenana. The temperatures were ungodly cold. At the beginning of the journey, they were at -45 degrees Fahrenheit, and combined with the wind, reached an all-time high of -84 degrees. It was so cold that Leonard had to jog alongside the sled to warm up his body heat. But this weather would only get worse. They set off at a time before the major snowstorm, in order to get to the package as soon as possible. The real test would be the trip back. And after 2 long, grueling days of racing, they made it to the station. But that was only the beginning. Now they had to make it all the way back to the town, in much harsher weather. And fast. The antidote can only last 6 days in the cold, before freezing and becoming unusable. This whole trip would mean nothing if that antidote froze over. so they needed to go faster than any dog team had ever gone before. They set back to Nome. But as soon as they were off, they found a new roadblock. The snow had blocked off the only path. They were now stuck on a mountain. No other options. Except one. They were near the Norton Sound, a massive lake. It was frozen over, and that lake was their only way out. They would need to slide across the entire lake. And that's exactly what they did. They sprinted onto the lake, trying to get to the other side as fast as possible to avoid ice breaking. But still, the ice began to break from under them. The ice was crumbling right under their feet, and the dogs would have to regularly pull their legs out of holes in the ice because of how fast it was breaking. If any of them fell in, all of them would die. The dogs were constantly slipping and tripping, getting dangerously close to falling into the cold, icy waters. The ice was so bumpy that Leonard would need to grip the serum as hard as he could. But they made it. They made it to the other side of the lake. But that still wasn't the end of it. Now the snowstorm had gotten so bad that they couldn't see. They were completely and utterly lost. At least, Leonard was. But Togo wasn't. Yeah, the dog. Somehow, incredibly, Togo single-handedly guided them all to a roadhouse at Isaac's Point, which is basically an old motel for travelers, so they could warm up. This pit stop saved every single one of their lives. If not for Togo, their entire sled team would have died of hypothermia. Balto typically gets the main credit, but I believe Togo is just as, if not more important, because he saved them all. They didn't stay too long at the roadhouse. Time was of the essence, and despite just barely recovering, they set back off. And after a run-in with some reindeer, they reached McKinley Mountain. Because of the storm, this mountain was the only way to continue the trail. They couldn't go around it. They had to scale the entire mountain, get to the peak, then scale down the other side. And they did just that, climbing 8 miles up in elevation. To put that in perspective, that's over a mile longer than the depth of the Mariana Trench, and they had to do all of that during a devastating snowstorm up a rocky mountain. While they were climbing, boulders started falling, and nearly killed one of the dogs, if not for its fast reflexes. Eventually, though, they made it off the mountain. But, yet again, they ran into another obstacle. Not on the trail, but new information from Nome, which they had heard at another roadhouse. Apparently, the cases of diphtheria had rose to 28, and they only had enough serum to treat 30 people. So if 3 more people got the disease, this would have all been for nothing. And right after getting that news, the power lines, their last lifeline to Nome, went out. Their only way to communicate is now gone. For the rest of this journey, they will have no idea if anyone in the town is still alive. And it was made even worse when, after they set back off, one of the vials was knocked off the sled, and the snow quickly covered it up. Now they only had enough serum for 29 people. But they continued. And you might be wondering when Balto comes into the story. Well, this is it. Because for the remainder of the journey, the snowstorm got to its worst, and now it was at a point where the writer couldn't even see any of the dogs right in front of him. Pretty much none of them could see at all, including the dogs. But the dogs had something the writer didn't: their sense of smell. Dogs have an amazing sense of smell, and Balto, now leading the pack, used that to guide the sled through the fields and forests for 25 whole miles. And eventually, through the snowy wind surrounding all their vision, for the first time in hours, they saw something. A light. The light of a town. And after all that, the crumbling ice lake, the reindeer, the mountain, the storms, they finally made it back to Nome, arriving back to Nome at 5:30 a.m., and immediately delivering the antitoxin. I say immediately, but it was so cold that it needed 5 hours to be thawed out. But the moment it was ready, it was administered to as many people as possible. And just like that, the epidemic was under control. The town was saved. Dr. Welch estimates the death toll to be just under 8 people, many children, which is a horrible loss. But it could have been so much worse if not for this team. Welch thought the mortality rate would be at 100%. So that means they saved the lives of over 1,000 people, and a large percentage of northern Alaska. Now that's not to say that diphtheria went away immediately. There were more cases later in the year, but because the snow had melted by then, and there were clear skies, it was infinitely easier to get more medicine. And eventually, the disease was completely eradicated from Nome. This feat is nothing to scoff at, considering it was done in such harsh conditions that at some point, a dog had to use their sense of smell to get around because of how stormy it got. Calvin Coolidge personally went to Nome and gave them letters of commemoration, and every person involved in the actual sledding received a gold medal. Los Angeles started a charity fund, which received donations from all across America, and New York City built a statue of Balto in Central Park, proudly displaying the heroic story on a plaque, a statue that remains to this day, 100 years later. And throughout the many years, the story of these dog sledders going on a fantastical journey to save the lives of children and succeeding became one of the world's favorite stories. Balto's taxidermied body is the prized exhibit in the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. The dog sledder and all the dogs themselves lived lives of touring the world, telling their story. A story that was later adapted into an animated film, which went on to be a major franchise, as well as countless more movies, books, shows, and back in 2019, Disney even made a movie on Togo, starring Willem Dafoe. It is truly heartwarming that this story is still told almost 100 years later, and is still a part of pop culture. And it deserves to be. This story shows the perseverance of humankind. Despite any setbacks, any risks, we will always keep trying. This story has people who risked their lives to do the right thing, and they succeeded. It's a success story, and is one of the few major stories in history to truly have a complete happy ending. And it will remain as one of the greatest achievements in human history.